Hey everyone, and welcome to the Private Podcast, where we plug in and explore the intersection of privacy, human rights, technology, and democracy. I'm your host, Derek E. Silva. As you can see, I have moved house. Ignore the boxes, please, if you're watching this on YouTube, because today joining me on the Private Podcast is Horacio Zambrano. Horacio is the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer at Secret Double Octopus, a company that offers passwordless authentication for the enterprise. Horacio began his career as a sales engineer at Informix, and after a Stanford MBA and an exciting 5 year stint in New York City as a Wall Street analyst, he restarted his operations by leading product management teams at Cisco Security. Now, over to the conversation with Horacio Zambrano. Hi, Horacio. Thanks so much for spending some time with us here on the private podcast today. We appreciate it.
How are you, Derek? Nice to meet you. I'm happy to be here as well.
Thanks. I'm doing well. Thanks. And great to meet you as well. Let's dive in and learn a little bit about more about you before we talk about some of the work you're doing now. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you went from being a Wall Street analyst to marketing and cybersecurity now?
Well, I was originally in tech for five,
Hmm.
6 years, and then I got a chance to work on Wall Street. It was very exhilarating. I was there for 5 years, um, and covered information security. It was a difficult time to be at Wall Street. I was just in 2007, 2008,
Mm,
during the
hmm.
Great Recession, and one of those visits to the Bay Area, I saw Mark Benioff and the product leaders at Salesforce talking about the future and what they were building. And I got really excited about doing that. And I said, I think I can do that. I mean, having been a technologist before, I felt like I missed that. I missed creating something.
Right.
And so I decided to start looking for ways to come back after the Great Recession from Wall Street. And yeah, it was great that Cisco gave me an opportunity to come back and start working operationally in the field again.
You and I were doing somewhat similar jobs in 2007, 2008. I was just trying to start a career as a financial advisor, and of
Mhm.
course, right around that time, everybody's um, any sort of potential risk they were willing to take completely dried up. They're just like, I'm not touching anything,
Yeah.
I'm not moving anything, I'm not buying more insurance. Like I'm just gonna hang on tight to all the cash I have and just leave everything as is and hope for the best. And so my ability to move books of business over completely dried up. And I imagine you're probably having a similar, depending on what you're doing, you're probably having a similar tough
Yeah,
time of trying to make things happen, basically, whatever your
true.
role was there on Wall Street. What were you doing before? You said you were a technologist before you got a chance to work on Wall Street.
So I came out of Stanford with a computer science degree, and I had worked at early on at Oracle and Formix in the 90s when the
Oh,
database.
cool.
So I really saw the inception of enterprise infrastructure software with databases, and I was doing a lot of broad sort of sales and marketing. I was going to Latin America and representing Informix, and then Gupta, which was a 4GL development tool, and
Yeah.
had done a lot of product marketing and business development. And then I went back to an MBA, which then gave me the entree into a broader set of careers, like going to Wall Street. So.
Yeah. Well, if you joined Cisco right after that time, you and I people we worked with might have also crossed paths because I was a research analyst I ended up becoming a research analyst at Infotech Research Group, which is like a small Canadian version of Gartner or Forrester,
Hmm.
and got to talk to all sorts of people at Cisco. I think Aparna Dave was there at that time. Had lead marketing for some division or another on the enterprise
Hmm.
side of things, and got to meet some other really great people. Went down to Stanford for the first Open Networking Foundation event back in 2010, I think, and
Yeah, that's about right.
yeah, I got to rub elbows with all sorts of folks there. So I don't remember your name coming up, but I imagine we were working with a lot of the same people. That's cool. Um, what was it like working on Wall Street, especially especially at that time? Like, I know that there were some harrowing stories from unfortunately some people who lost themselves or lost some clients a lot of money, but obviously you survived. What was that like for you?
For me, it was great because I love to learn. Into mastery, and it was a new vector of learning about financial statements and how companies operate at the C level. um, the whole business of how stocks move and everything behind that. So it was just a great learning, and personally as well. I was in New York City, which I always wanted to live in, and you know, I met my wife there. It was just a very 5 years of really great learning, and aside from the fact that we were in this recession, it was uh, it was great to add this new skill set to my toolbox. Like you to call a stock or to downgrade a stock. I was an equity research analyst.
Oh, okay,
You
yeah,
have to have you have imperfect information. You have to build a story, a logical story, and you have to be able to communicate that really simply, which was totally different than what I was seeing in tech, right? In tech, the way people storytell is very almost cookie cutter, and it was jargony. And in Wall Street, you have to be very crisp, very quick,
yeah,
and you have to have a lot of conviction about non-perfect information, which is something that's helped me in the startup game because you don't ever have perfect information. So it was very transformative for me as a tech person to work in high finance, and it's also a privileged position because you're working at the numbers level, which is ultimately businesses for profit. So you can kind of dissect businesses and make big decisions about what you're going to do on a go-to-market strategy or business, just analyze the revenue model, and you don't have to get involved in the dirty details of building a business, the tactics and the
yeah,
and the grind. And so I think it's a very privileged position. I'm happy I did it, but in the end, I wanted to build something. I felt like I was pushing information and getting paid for that, and not really adding to, and especially at that time with the 1% Occupy movement happened after the Great Recession. I think there
yeah.
was a lot of people reevaluating whether they were adding value to society or what have you, or doing what they really wanted. It's sort of what we're doing now with the pandemic, but maybe due to the economic shock that happened.
Yeah, yeah, going through a lot of the same. I think it's probably a different story this time. It's for this time. I think it's more about like, do I actually want to keep doing this job? What sort of like, does my employer actually care about me? And then, of course, if you're working in an office, do I need to live in downtown Toronto or in on Manhattan Island, or can I, or like in right on San Francisco, like in the city, or can I live
Yeah.
half an hour to an hour to even further away, depending on how often your employer or vendors, or sorry, or clients rather, how often they actually want to see you face to face and stuff like that. And like I've
Right.
been working remotely for over 4 years now. It's it works for me. But when I do get the chance to actually see people, then it's really special. Like, and it's usually in a really nice location. As opposed to some random office in a suburban or downtown area that I go to every single day. So instead, it's like, oh, we're gonna do an event in Paris, we're gonna do an event in San Francisco, and I think it means a lot more for people, especially now after 2 years of, or almost two
Yeah.
years of practically nothing, no in-person get-togethers. Um, so when did this transition to cybersecurity happen? You're working in RBDMS type stuff before, relational databases, with Oracle and Informax, as you said. Did a stint in Wall Street. Wanted to build
hmm
something again. Was that when that flip happened to cybersecurity, or did it happen a little bit after that?
Yeah, I think primarily I had a little stint before Wall Street with WebSense. I was
Oh
there
yeah.
for less than a year actually, but
God, how did you
WebSense
and
was
I
a
not cross
productivity.
paths? I did a whole
They
web
were,
content filtering vendor landscape at
yeah.
Infotech because I was like I love this topic, and I talked to WebSense and Barracuda and um
hmm
oh god, Pure something or other at the time. Like, I'm really surprised now you and I didn't cross paths. But anyway, okay, so you worked at WebSense for a little bit.
Yeah, so I was at WebSense when they were transitioning into more of a security, anti-spyware premium groups they were selling.
Yeah.
And then that was when I went to Wall Street, that was a hot stock. So I became what's called an axe. The axe. The axe is one of the 15 analysts, of the 15 analysts, the two people that have an inside view, that have the best view of what's going to happen in the business.
Okay.
And so that really helped me become a well-known, highly ranked software analyst, covering information security. So this was in the mid 2000s. There was a lot of consolidation. RSA got bought, ISSX got bought. Microsoft wrote that famous missive about focusing on security while I was
Hmm.
an analyst. So I kind of got my feet wet with seeing the industry as a whole that way. And then when I came back to Cisco, I ran the AnyConnect business, which is the leading sort of IPsec VPN product. And at that time, smartphones were coming into the enterprise, and it was all about bring your own device,
Yeah.
and mobile device management was coming on the scene. So AnyConnect had a lot of strategy around that, and whether we get into that market or not early on, this was way before AI or ML was really being talked
Oh
about.
yeah, for
So I
sure.
think that this was the age of when I was at Cisco and coming back in operationals. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you you and I should have crossed paths. I'm still very surprised we didn't, but I'm gonna stop belaboring the point. Um, okay, so from there you ended up with, or at least at some point in recent history, you ended up with Secret Double Octopus. Tell us a little bit about that
Yeah.
and the work you're doing there.
Yeah, so we're a growing early stage software vendor based out of Tel Aviv, Israel, but now with most of the go-to-market function here in North America. Most of our customers are in the US. We're closing in on 100 this year,
Cool.
and I think the most deployed passwordless MFA solution for workforces, for employees in the market. And I run global marketing here, which includes product marketing. And I influence, whereas I was a product manager at Cisco, I sort of influence product strategy here just by knowing the competitive environment well and talking to analysts and what they're thinking about in the market. So that's sort of my influence there. But most of what I do is really help position the company, the vision, articulate the vision better or clarify the vision, and get it out in consistent ways so that the brand gets built over time and people know what we do.
That's good. Well, speaking of the brand, we have to address this very unique name of Secret Double Octopus. Is this like
Yeah.
an Israeli cultural thing I'm not aware of, maybe, or like how was this name conceived?
Yeah, it's the brainchild of Shimrit Sur David. She's the one of the co-founders.
Okay.
She came out of an academic program in one of the universities in Israel, and it has to do with the way, some two important features in the product. One is that we're the only product that's doing passwordless that rotates the password. So every time you log in, we're rotating it to some level of complexity that you want at
Oh,
a
okay.
configurable rate. So if anybody ever got your was able to breach a password store in an organization, those passwords would be invalid at that point. And so, but we have to be able to transfer that password that's rotated to different, like to a mobile phone in some cases. And so that's a point of weakness if you don't do that correctly. So we didn't just do encryption, we did what's called secret sharing. So we send that through multiple channels so that you would have to man in the middle, get every channel and then recompose the password within a fast amount of time to defeat that way of communicating. So when you do that, I think there's an image of like of tentacles that are transferring those bits,
Right.
and so that's where it comes from. She's told me that visually you can see this, but I can't visually see it. But that's where it comes from. It's part of the secret sharing that we do, which is actually quantum safe, and it's actually part of what the U.S. nuclear codes also use for
Oh
transmission
wow.
as well. So it's a very academic kind of way of transferring bits.
Nuclear grade security. I think that's better than bank grade security. I hear bank grade security sometimes, and I'm like, yeah, and like nuclear grade security. I think
That's why
makes sense.
AES 256.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm like, but nuclear grade security just sounds more impressive.
that's
Maybe
pretty
to
good.
me at
Yeah.
least, maybe not to other people. Okay, so you think you just give us a bit of a rundown on what exactly Secret Double Octopus does and the product you produce. Um, and so you're doing this for the entire workforce, mobile devices, laptops, desktops, etc. Based on what I saw on the website. It's very comprehensive in the sense that it looks like you can
Mm.
use this across pretty much any piece of software, any web application, mobile application. Is that more or less correct?
Yeah, that's actually the vision, right? And that's what we have. It's workforce passwordless authentication is coming on strong on the consumer side
Mhm.
as well as on the workforce on the employee side. In fact, Google just made a big announcement yesterday around Chrome and all the browsers supporting the FIDO standard. So
Yes.
there's a group called FIDO Alliance, which is defining the standard that Apple finally came in on a couple years ago. and all the
Microsoft
major
as
browser
well.
vendors, so that yeah, so as a consumer, you'll be able to go to different services on the cloud and you won't have to type a password. So some of those standards have it's using public-private keys, public key cryptography. That's being applied to enterprise solution architectures too. And we can support FIDO keys. Companies like YubiKey and Phaeton so, create these keys that
Yeah.
you could plug in into your laptops. We also support, I mean, the main way that people use this though is through a smartphone. So you come up to, MFA has been used in applications, but it's not often used for your Windows machine
Right.
or your laptops. You do have biometrics like Touch ID, and you have Windows Hello for Business that are now there, but there's a password underneath that.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing is eliminating the possibility of the user ever having to remember that password, and and so we do it using the smartphone, which has local biometrics, and unlike a two-factor authentication push, that also the biometric is involved, or you can use FIDO keys, and so that's the workforce passwordless authentication. As people are looking at MFA for remote work or the pandemic hybrid workforces, they're starting to look at passwordless more and more. We're
Mm.
seeing an uptick that hey, if maybe the first initial response to the pandemic was that we just need to get a VPN out to more people. Maybe we need to roll out a little bit more MFA.
Yeah.
Now I think people are taking the time to think about zero trust, to think about what's the long game for our authentication, because we've been hearing about this passwordless stuff for a long time, and now they're starting to really take on projects for it.
Is there any talk yet about using I'll just call them like Web3 wallets, like an Ethereum wallet or a Bitcoin, signing mechanism or anything like message signing mechanism or anything like that at this point? Or is that like something on the roadmap you guys want to explore some more? Like, you know, I'm using the MetaMask browser extension here, so I'm already in my laptop, but like you could potentially sign a message over a blockchain, and it doesn't have to be a public one; it could be a private one. But over a blockchain
Yeah.
that authenticates I am who I am. Obviously, I see some visibility. I get some visibility there about where I'm signing into and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's some of that. It's not in the enterprise space. Most of that's on I would call that decentralized identity.
Yeah.
And that, MasterCard and some of the big players have industry groups that are working on those kind of standards. And some vendors already have blockchain architectures for their solutions, but most of it's deployed and more interesting for the banks and for the consumers.
Hmm.
The enterprises, I don't think they're as tied up on that. They're more tied up on, does it integrate with my systems?
Right.
Does it not disrupt everything I've invested in identity and access management? I've got a lot of stuff. I got Microsoft, I've got Okta, I've got a bunch of stuff. Does it fit with that? How does it play with my VPN, my Cisco, my Palo Alto networks, my Checkpoint? It's a lot more an integration enterprise story. Whereas what you're talking about is more decentralized identity, which goes with decentralized finance.
Sure.
There's a lot more privacy around there. It's a lot more your your data, you own your identity, and you get the right to tell other groups whether you want to sort of be authenticated with them,
Yeah.
or be, if you apply for a loan somewhere and Bank of America accepts you, do you want to use that as a verification for other services um, you may apply to, because you passed the B of A sort of credit mortgage process? So that says something, right? Or you went to Stanford, so Stanford is an academic credential that has been verified by Stanford,
Right.
so you can propose that to a new job. So that's happening more on the consumer side than I think on the enterprise side today.
Okay. Fair enough. I was just curious about, yeah, whether like their enterprises or whether it was on your roadmap to incorporate that sort of thing. But yeah, if there's no interest right now on the enterprise side of things, then I understand it's probably not something for you guys to spend a lot of time on at the moment. Um,
Yeah.
so interest in this sort of solution is certainly being driven or is happening. You're right. I did hear about the announcement earlier this week about Apple, Microsoft, Google, and pretty much everybody else in the FIDO Alliance, that are already in there, making sure everything works really, really well together. So you could be using the one example I heard was logging into an application in Chrome, running on a Windows laptop using your iPhone. So Google, Microsoft, and Apple all working together there, and probably some sort of third party application, whether it's from Double Secret Octopus or somebody else running on the iPhone. It needs to be seamless through, or else you're going to run into adoption and deployment issues, of course. Um, what do you think some of the biggest threats enterprises are facing today, as far as our current reality of a very hybrid environment? Certainly much more hybrid, and probably for the foreseeable future than we've ever seen before.
I think it's phishing and ransomware have gone up a lot since the pandemic. So there's still ransomware in the sense that um, you can still get infiltrated. A lot of firms have opened up RDP ports to the internet because they need their admins to log in. And Colonial Pipeline was one of those situations where somebody was able to get in through an account that should have been deactivated. So RDP, brute force RDP attacks. So people are just spanning the internet with automated attacks for RDP.
Yeah,
I think phishing, just because you may be people may be connecting from home where they don't have as much of the email filters necessarily. Maybe they're going straight out to the cloud or 365, and you're seeing you depend on Microsoft there to catch a lot of phishing, but they may get through. Um, and or they may be working from a coffee shop and get some sort of Wi-Fi, unencrypted Wi-Fi sort of
yeah,
interception. But I think in general, how do you know? I mean, we're moving to being more of a remote society. So this idea of high assurance identity, like how do you actually know, aside from that the person that's in your laptop actually in the long run is that person over time, right? And you still need to have a password right now, but there's nothing to say that if you're holding things in a post-it that's on the laptop that somebody else couldn't get in, so you're not always seeing people, right? So I think that as we move to more remote environments, this concept of sort of high assurance identity or zero trust architecture has to take hold over time, and identity plays a big part of that.
yeah. And even just the age old story of making sure employees are doing are engaging in smart security practices, like post-it note beside the laptop is obviously a bad idea. um Not turning on 2FA or multi-factor authentication, obviously also a bad idea. Like I remember my first full-time gig, or at least not my first, but my when I got into the blockchain and cryptocurrency space, my first gig there, we had a big spreadsheet of like, here are your OPSEC things you need to do, and as you go through this list, make sure you check it all off so that the executives know that you've actually gone through it and you're attesting to the fact that you've actually turned on 2FA, or set a new password, a new strong password, and stuff like that that complies to a certain standard. And it was something I was already doing anyway, but it also reminded me of a few accounts that I hadn't turned on MFA, and I did take the time to reset a few passwords because I was like, ah, yeah, that password's a little old now, and I remember setting it myself. Like I know the password, and so like my days of knowing all my passwords are long gone. That is literally years ago at this point. And while that can be scary for a lot of people, you put them in a password manager where one super strong password, at least at this point, from a consumer perspective, and even from an enterprise perspective, often, still, because the passwordless thing is not we're not at 100% penetration, at this point. And yeah, it's been amazing to see how much things have changed in the last few years. Pandemic obviously accelerated a lot of that, because like you said earlier, everybody else all of a sudden had to work from home. You needed VPNs, you needed virtual desktops, the RDP thing, you needed or to send hardware home and pray that your employees didn't weren't sharing it with their 8-year olds or whatever, and or installing TikTok on a corporate device. And yeah, things have really changed, or lasted a while. uh there we go. So you have this passwordless MFA. You guys obviously have a vision that you're striving towards. What do you think? What are some of the features that your solution brings to the table at this point that either other competitors don't have, or their solution pales in comparison to Secret Double Octopus?
Yeah, so we had to develop several, right? Because we have customers that have 100,000 employees on mission critical every day. They're logging in, and this has been a 6-year journey for us. Again, we have a unique way to approach the problem because of the password rotation, whereas most of the market is using sort of certificate-based approach,
Mm.
and that's differentiated. So what that buys us, because we are very intimately working with the Active Directory or your Azure directory or the Okta directory, we're preserving that password there but rotating it. What that buys us is some features that I think other type of approaches would be harder to do. So we noticed that the enterprises are afraid to go to passwordless in some cases. That's sort of too psychologically too big a jump. So we've created some features like password free, where you're using our infrastructure, you're using the smartphone, it's getting the pushes from us in a secret sharing way, but the user themselves still can set the password. They set it, but then from then on, they never have to type it in because it's already using our mechanism to just click the login Gina, and it gets the request and it does a biometric. So, but they just want the security that their users set the password just in case there's that one corner use case where they can't use the solution, so they want to be able to remember it.
Yeah.
And then after they get comfortable with the fact that it's always working, then they're ready to start pulling that password away, and they start letting the system rotate the password. So now the user's not doing it, but the system is doing it. And then lastly, there's the last step of that would be you don't even let the users retrieve it. So you can remove retrieval, which means you can't go on the iPhone app or the Android app and see the password, which would get you out of a log jam if you were on some sort of app, some sort of splinter app.
Right.
So the different levels of flexibility we offer companies to get to password, we call it the passwordless journey. I think we're very flexible in that way. You can even run our system as a traditional MFA with a password on the desktop. So we extend Okta Verify and ForgeRock MFA. We extend them into the desktop environments for Macs and Windows. So you can be running us either as an extension to an existing password-based MFA. You
Mm.
could run us as a password MFA, or and then you can finally make that jump once you've deployed the component. You can just flip the switch and go passwordless with us. So we have a lot of flexibility, and that's all due to that architecture. We also support Google user directories, so you can think about all the companies that run their email and their user directory
Yeah.
on Google. You can use an iPhone or an Android with our system to be rotating passwords in the Google user directory and get onto your Windows machine or Mac using your Gmail in
Oh,
our
okay.
solution. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we support legacy applications. Yeah. So the number
That's
one reasons people don't deploy passwordless is because there's some Oracle or some on-premise legacy application. Those may or may not be hooked into your directory,
right.
and we have very strong support for that. Most of the industry just kind of like throws up their hands and says we can't do anything about that because we're certificate-based architecture. We have solutions for legacy on-premise apps. Those are just three things that we do.
Yeah, and I imagine, especially for the end users, that actually makes them feel a little bit more comfortable. Like, oh, I still have a password if I really need it.
Yeah, yeah. That's right. It's psychological, really it is. I mean, but it helps people get comfortable with a totally new technology, new way of doing things, and you need that because it's just
Yeah.
it's almost as much of an education and a process issue as it is the technology today.
Yeah, your current state that you're used to becomes your backup plan instead, and that way, like a bit of a security blanket. It's still there if I absolutely need it. If I lose my phone, drop it in the toilet. I'm on vacation. There's a fire, that I have to help put out, and I just, I dropped it in the ocean and a shark ate it or something. I've got a password that I can fall back to. Um, what I heard about the FIDO Alliance thing, and maybe you guys offer as well, is like in that case the access to your email, so you can like click a link to verify it as you, is the backup solution there. Is there anything like that, or do you or does Secret Double Octopus's backup plan for in case you lose your authenticator, or do you offer different solutions?
Yeah.
So like having a password is great, but like what if you don't remember the password?
So so our backup plan for the passwordless is the FIDO key, right?
Okay.
Because the mobile phone is your primary authenticator with the biometrics there. And let's say you broke your mobile phone or it gets stolen. then you have the ability to issue a 12-hour, 24-hour FIDO key today.
Okay.
We are looking at other things that will make it even less of the need for FIDO keys at all, in the sense that, identity proofing is the next level for this industry. Is basically that today, when I enroll you into the Secret Double Octopus system, I'm using your corporate email, which
Hmm.
most enterprises are happy enough to say, if you're able to get to your inbox on the corporate inbox, that's probably you.
Yeah.
So you get the email and you set up your phone, and now you're enrolled. The next level would be, are we sure that's really you that is getting to that corporate inbox? And can we use some of the identity verification and proofing technologies that are being used on the consumer side
Mm.
to maybe get your ID, your driver's license, and do a live selfie verification as a person as part of that enrollment, a more advanced enrollment? And if we do that, then maybe we can store your facial picture in a 3D mathematical model, so it's not privacy risking. And then when you lose your phone, maybe there's a way to use that and do a face match with the webcam to let you into your PC, your desktop,
Yeah.
and then you can then issue yourself some sort of temporary thing. So we're looking at ways to make this the backup use case more more common. And on the password side, when you're running it as traditional MFA, um, you still need that second factor, right? So the
Right.
password by itself won't get you there, but that's the benefit is the key challenge with these passwordless solutions to make them self-service, full self-recovery, self-service, because those are the things that those niche use cases are what people in the enterprise are looking at.
Yeah. Is there any room now or in the future? And I know lots of people are becoming more and more wary of how much data they give an employer. But obviously, if you're relying on an employer for your bread and butter and bringing the bacon home, then in a lot of cases you don't have much of a choice. But is there any room here for utilizing more consumer stuff like biometrics from an Apple Watch, a Fitbit, an Oura Ring, anything like that? To sense of like, yeah, it's probably Derek because his Oura Ring is telling us that like he's got a very normal heart rate right now, like over time, like this is almost certainly him. Heart rate, blood pressure, blood oxygen level, whatever else it might be measuring. Is there any room for that in the enterprise or as part of solutions like this in the future?
There is. I mean, it's being talked about. I'm not sure we're there yet. Like the enterprises aren't paying for it, but this is the concept of continuous authentication.
Yeah.
So not only did I get you into the system, but now you're using it over time. And can we tell by signals that are happening that this is still you? I would think that that's going to happen more. I was talking to one of the hardware vendors, the laptop vendors, this week around presence detection
Hmm.
and the idea that our camera vision, to know that it's that you're still in front of the computer and you haven't walked away. So Microsoft is also talking about when you walk away from the computer, it locks up automatically, and this is an area that passwordless vendors are also looking at. But I think tying it together with what the hardware and the underlying firmware manufacturers are doing on the endpoint around presence, and this was a term that I coined at my prior company around presence, but I think the hardware vendors are also starting to use it. So just the knowledge of where you're at in the environment in front of these systems, tying that to what we're doing on the passwordless side would be really powerful. Um, and I don't think it'll get to the Aura rings, but we are already at the point where we can use an iWatch to open up your laptop. The same way you would use the iPhone, you can just accept things there
Yeah.
and open up your laptop. So for sure, the Apple ecosystem and the Google ecosystems will let us do things for the watches, but the next step I think is going to be that presence detection and computer vision type things.
Yeah, I use my Apple Watch to unlock my MacBook. At least when I'm at home. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if it works when I'm not at home because the network signal is sometimes too weak. And meanwhile, like my wrist is like back here. I'm like, I'm close. I'm just not. It's just not on the keyboard. But
So
there are
the
times.
value prop that we offer, imagine using that iWatch for anything you touch in the enterprise, your apps, or you're on a non-Apple bring your own device, and you go
Yeah.
to on the cloud, you go to an Okta or you go to one of your cloud apps, and you can use your iWatch to get into that. That's the universality that we provide with Secret Double Octopus.
Yeah, that would be nice. Like there are some services that I use where they're hooked directly into Authy, which is my preferred MFA app, and so because they're actually
Yeah.
using Twilio Authy's infrastructure, I can get like an actual notification on my watch of like, are you trying to log in? Yes, I am. Tap. Great. But most of them are using something else on the back end, and so I actually need to go in and dig out the 6 digit code at the time, or 7 or 8, depending on the solution. So, which it's not a huge inconvenience, especially for the additional security that's provided. But if I could be in a position more and more where it's like, yes, that's me, great, or it literally senses like this is me and just lets me in, that's cool too. But I guess that brings up the larger thing of like the privacy policy, data storage, etc., where that all comes in. I guess that's pretty much all on your client. Is that right? Or does your Secret Double Octopus's infrastructure have any user identifiable data or anything like that, like outside the enterprise, that you guys also have to store, secure, etc.?
Yeah, that's a big misconception. We don't store any biometrics. It's all local to your phone. It's the
Mm,
same one you use to open the phone if you're using Face ID or thumbprint.
yeah.
Um, so the worst case scenario is somebody somehow, and that's stored in a TPM chip that's a secret enclave. So,
Right.
you know, if that gets hacked independently, that would be one person getting hacked as opposed to an entire organization of password credentials. So we don't store biometrics in the cloud. We actually offer on-premise and cloud.
Mm,
So, but your user directory stays on your premise, and we just have a server that connects to that and rotates. So we have a decentralized vault in our server architectures where the cryptography is. So that's very highly secure as well. So yeah, there's not much private for us. We're not in the consumer realm either.
hmm.
So we're very much in the enterprise. But you do see some privacy discussion of it in Europe with these type of solutions. But for the most part, we are not. It's more education of getting people comfortable knowing that there's not anything that we're storing
Yeah.
that is privacy oriented.
You were talking about the like doing a liveness photo and stuff like that. I guess that would be done direct to whatever technology solution is on the back end there. And if something was stored, would that also be reliant on your clients to store on their own infrastructure, whether it's on prem or hosted somewhere?
Yeah,
I
probably, and
guess
I
that'd be
think
a
that's
hash
that's
or
definitely an
something.
area of a lot of education. There's providers, the top providers in that space that sell the engines of liveness detection.
Hmm.
They don't. They're ephemeral. First of all, a lot of that's ephemeral. It's in the moment, and then secondly, they do 3D mathematical models and face maps that you can't reverse engineer. I mean, they're one in multi-millions of opportunity, much more secure than even the biometrics on your phone. So there's some education there if we do introduce those type of features in that we may not even store anything other than a mathematical 3D face map, if that at all. And this self-recovery thing of holding a picture from your ID, I mean, that could exist already in your HR system. I mean,
Right.
they might be in Workday or success factors, and we may just do an API where we pull it and then do the live selfie, and there's no storage in our solution. We're just an enabler for that momentary authentication. So yeah, there's a lot of education, there's a lot of architecture here, and figuring out what is the privacy domain there, and how do you want to store those things.
Almost starts to feel like you guys are like the Zapier of passwordless authentication. Like you're sitting in the middle, you're facilitating
Yeah.
connections, making things happen, keeping it secure. Obviously, not that I'm gonna, I'm not just suggesting you guys go around pitching yourselves as the Zapier of security, but it's just like just the way you were describing, like going into Workday, grabbing that photo, or like just matching up the data for the photo and what's coming in, etc. Like just from a consumer perspective, just made me think of Zapier or Integromat, which very much they don't store the data. They just they run connections. Basically it's like a fancy cron job in most cases there. But okay, that's cool. Earlier you were talking about some of that privacy discussion happening in Europe. That's been going on for a while. We have GDPR already. California now has the CCPA, the California something Privacy Act. Um, Canada has had some sort of privacy legislation, PIPEDA and PIPEDA, for healthcare records specifically for a long time now. Oh, do you think we need a global data privacy standard or law, or is there something more advantageous to having more jurisdictional regulation where we can learn from good and bad things that happen after the fact, like Aadhaar in India as a privacy or an identity standard definitely has had some flaws that I think everybody's been able to learn from. GDPR, I think, has probably had some
Mhm.
unintended consequences already that we've been able to learn from in the U.S. and Canada. Is there any benefit to having something global, or at least as a standard, or do you prefer, more or less the approach we have right now as a global society?
Well, I mean, I think it's becoming, I think a global standard will be helpful. I'm not sure if it'd be too restrictive, though. I think that there's so many regulations coming on now that it's almost business prohibitive for small companies to be able to adhere to all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, we just launched our cloud backend, which works with an individual company's sort of directories on premise, and that's going to help a lot. A lot of companies are interested in that, but if we start selling that in Europe, we need to, as a small company, we have to have a data center operation in Germany or whatever.
Yeah.
So it just increases costs, and then you've got to have legal to really analyze all the regulations there to make sure you're doing the right things. We just set up our infrastructure for GDPR fully to people can ask us to remove things, to delete records, what information do we store on them.
Right.
Um, we just finished our SOC 2 compliance. So it's just more, there might be some other credentials like that that you need to do in Europe to certify that you, or in some other part of the world that you certify that you meet their privacy requirements, and that's just a lot of cost. So I think that's the benefit of a global standard. But knowing how we're as a world, we don't get together on too many things that we standardize and even act on.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's possible, but yeah, it would be nice.
Yeah, I used to be one of those people who, when I was very young and naive, used to think like, yeah, one world government would be great. Just treat everybody the same, apply labor rules. And there are very small aspects to that I think would be great, especially in labor rules, making sure that forced labor doesn't happen, and slaves, any slave labor that's still
Yeah.
going on, or child labor or whatever. But like, the older you get, the more experience you get, the more you realize we're probably going to end up with more governments, not more, or not fewer over time. Everybody wants to have
I
their
mean,
own
we
little
can't even.
fiefdom.
My understanding is we can't even agree on war crimes, right? Some people
Yeah.
don't. The Hague rules. They don't accept them, right? So
Yeah.
it's some countries.
Yeah, there are definitely some things, some structures that have been in place for a long time now that definitely need, in my opinion, and for a long time, my opinion, because I've done some research on this, need to change. And I think we're running. I don't think we are running into that right now. As anybody who's been in tune to the news over the last 2 months should be aware. So cool. All right, Horacio, thank you so much for spending time with us here on Private Podcast again. If people want to maybe see what you have to say, or keep up to date on Secret Double Octopus, where should they go?
Our website, doubleoctopus.com. We're also very active on LinkedIn. We have a page there for our company. We post there quite a bit, and Twitter as well. So those are the main channels that we're putting information out on.
Terrific. All right. Well, head over to doubleoctopus.com if you want to learn more about the solution, or find links to the socials there. Thanks to everybody for listening, and until next time, stay free.